Ambassador Vexila stood at the panoramic viewport of the Selenian diplomatic vessel, her emerald skin catching the light of the distant stars. Her crimson hair, adorned with ceremonial silver beads that marked her high status, cascaded down her back in elaborate braids. The approaching human ship grew larger in the viewport, a sleek, metallic behemoth representing Earth's first diplomatic mission to the Selenian system. "The humans are hailing us, Ambassador," her aide Trill announced, his tone betraying his distaste. "Their captain wishes to speak with you directly." Vex straightened her formal robes, adorned with the intricate patterns representing her lineage. "Put him through." The view screen flickered to life, revealing a human male with intense gray eyes and a strong jawline. His dark hair was cut short in what Vex assumed was a military style. "Ambassador Vexila," he said, his deep voice carrying a warmth that surprised her. "I'm Captain Darius Blackwood of the Earth Alliance. It's an honor to finally meet you." Something in his direct gaze made her inner hearts flutter, a physiological response she immediately suppressed. "Captain Blackwood. Welcome to Selenian space. Your journey has been long. Worth every light year to forge peace between our worlds," he replied with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. The negotiations were scheduled to last 12 cycles. By the third, Vex found herself lingering after the formal sessions, engaging in what humans called small talk with Captain Blackwood. By the sixth cycle, she had asked him to call her Vex when they were alone. "Your people's customs are fascinating," Darius said as they walked through the ship's arboretum during a rare break. Bioluminescent flora cast a soft blue glow over his features. "But I sense there's more to you than just protocol and duty." Vex brushed a strand of crimson hair from her face. "What makes you say that, Captain?" "Your eyes," he said simply. "They hold questions. Curiosity. Not just about humans, but about everything. It's refreshing among diplomats." She felt a warmth spread across her cheeks, knowing the emerald hue was deepening to jade, a Selenian blush. "We aren't supposed to show such individualistic traits." "Then why do you?" The question hung between them, dangerous and thrilling. Vex had never been challenged this way, not by her own people, who prized conformity and tradition above all. "Because I believe there's more to existence than what we're taught," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The words were heresy among her kind. That night, when Darius guided her to his quarters under the pretense of reviewing Earth's agricultural proposals, Vex knew she was crossing a line. The Selenian Council had strict laws against intimate relations with other species, laws rooted in ancient fears and prejudices. His quarters were modest but distinctly human, personal items displayed openly, a concept foreign to her minimalist culture. He offered her a drink in a glass tumbler, their fingers brushing during the exchange. "You're trembling," he observed. "This is forbidden," she said, but didn't move away when he stepped closer. "Is that why you came?" His voice was gentle, without judgment. The truth spilled from her lips before she could stop it. "I came because when I'm with you, I feel like myself. Not Ambassador Vexila, not a representative of the Selenian High Council. Just Vex." His hand reached up, hesitating just shy of touching her face. "May I?" She nodded, her breath catching as his warm fingers traced the iridescent markings along her cheekbone, markings that told the story of her bloodline to any Selenian who saw them. "Beautiful," he murmured. When their lips met, Vex felt as though she was falling through space without a tether. His kiss was gentle at first, then hungry with desire that matched her own growing need. Her hands found his shoulders, solid and warm beneath her touch. They spent hours exploring each other, the differences in their physiology becoming points of fascination rather than division. Darius traced the patterns of luminescent freckles that dotted her shoulders and back, while she marveled at the smoothness of his skin, so unlike her own textured dermis. Afterward, as they lay entwined in his bed, Vex knew she had changed irrevocably. "If my people discover this, She whispered against his chest. "We'll face it together," Darius promised, his fingers running through her crimson strands. "This isn't just physical, Vex. I think I'm falling in love with you." She placed her hand over his heart, feeling its steady rhythm. "I believe I already have." But their secret couldn't last. On the 11th cycle, as the peace treaty neared completion, Counselor Zethmore, Vex's superior, demanded a private audience with her. "You have disgraced your position and your people," he hissed, throwing evidence of her liaisons with the human captain onto the table between them, surveillance images, biological scans. "The council has been notified. You will be tried for species defilement and treason." "Our laws are archaic," Vex argued, her voice stronger than she felt. "Humans are not our enemies. They're our equals. Your human will be sent back to Earth," Zethmore continued as if she hadn't spoken. "And you will face the council's judgment alone." As guards entered to escort her to detention, Vex realized she had only one choice to protect Darius. "Tell Captain Blackwood I've been recalled for internal matters," she instructed her aide through tears. Tell him I've reconsidered everything." The last glimpse she had of the human ship departing was through the small window of her detention cell. She pressed her palm against the cold surface, knowing Darius was leaving with a heart full of betrayal and confusion, but alive. They would condemn her for loving a human. But she would endure, carrying the memory of his touch like a talisman. Captain Darius Blackwood stood rigid on the bridge of the Earth Alliance vessel Horizonte, his face a mask of professional detachment as his crew prepared for departure from Selenian space. Inside, his mind was chaos. "Captain, we've received final clearance from Selenian Control," his first officer, Commander Eliza Mason, reported. "Ambassador Vexila sends her regrets that she cannot bid us farewell in person. Apparently, she's been recalled for internal matters." Darius gripped the armrest of his command chair. "No further message?" "Just diplomatic pleasantries, sir. And confirmation that the treaty will proceed as negotiated." He nodded curtly. "Set course for Earth, Commander. Maximum speed." That night, alone in his quarters, Darius shattered a glass against the wall, watching the fragments scatter like the pieces of his heart. The message he'd received privately was brief, clinical. "Upon reflection, I find our personal interactions inappropriate and counter to my duties. Please accept my withdrawal." No explanation. No goodbye. Just bureaucratic dismissal of everything they'd shared. "Computer, replay surveillance recording of Ambassador Vexila's last known movements," he commanded. The holographic display showed Vex walking with Counselor Zethmore, her posture tense. Then guards appeared, flanking her. The recording ended abruptly. "Computer, connect me to Admiral Thorne." Minutes later, his superior's weathered face appeared on screen. "Captain Blackwood. You've departed Selenian space ahead of schedule." "Sir, I believe Ambassador Vexila may be in danger." "The last surveillance is none of our concern," the Admiral interrupted sharply. "The Selenians have internal politics we're not privy to, Captain. The treaty is signed. That was your mission." "But Admiral, this conversation is over, Captain. The diplomatic corps has made it clear, we do not interfere in Selenian affairs." The connection terminated, leaving Darius staring at his reflection in the black screen. In it, he saw a man who had broken the first rule of diplomacy: never get personally involved. For weeks, he sent encrypted messages to Vex, all returned undelivered. He requested assignment to the newly established Earth Embassy on Selenia, only to be firmly redirected to patrol duty in the opposite sector. "She used you, Darius," Eliza told him one night over drinks, months later. "Got what she wanted for her people and moved on." "You didn't know her like I did," he insisted. "No one did," Eliza said gently. "That's the problem." On Selenia's frozen moon, Vexila shivered in the barren hut that had been her home since her conviction. Exile to the outer reaches was considered merciful compared to execution. She was permitted no communication, no visitors. Only automated supply drops kept her alive. Her once vibrant crimson hair had dulled to rust, her elaborate braids replaced by a simple knot to keep the frigid wind from whipping it across her face. She wore the plain gray garments of the condemned, the ceremonial markings on her skin deliberately obscured with chemical treatments, her identity, her lineage, wiped away. Each night, she projected the small hologram she'd managed to keep hidden, Darius's face, captured during their brief time together. Each morning, she recited the same promise: one day, you'll know the truth. Vex had one visitor in those years, Trill, her former aide, who risked his own standing to bring news during a covert supply run. The treaty with the humans has evolved, he told her, huddled in her small shelter as a storm raged outside. Trade routes have opened. Cultural exchanges initiated. And Darius, she asked, the name painful on her lips after so long unspoken. Trill's expression darkened. Captain Blackwood has been promoted. He now commands the Earth Alliance military operations in our sector. He's changed, Vexila. The rumors say he's become a hard man. Uncompromising. Because of me, she whispered, closing her eyes against the ache. Because of what he believes I did. Why not tell him the truth? I could smuggle a message. And risk your position? Your life? She shook her head. The council made themselves clear. Any contact, and they would void the treaty, citing human manipulation. Earth would be blamed. War could follow. The laws are changing, slowly, Trill offered. More Selenians question the old prejudices since meeting humans. Some even speak openly of interspecies relationships. Hope flickered briefly in Vex's heart before reality doused it. Not enough change. Not fast enough. 3 Earth years passed. Darius rose through the ranks, his hardened efficiency earning him command of the military division overseeing Selenian relations. The warmth that once defined him had calcified into something colder, more calculating. If Vex had taught him anything, it was that vulnerability was a weakness he could no longer afford. He studied everything about Selenian culture, politics, and military capabilities, not out of the fascination he once felt, but with clinical precision. The dossiers on his desk grew thicker. The questions about Vexila's sudden disappearance from diplomatic channels remained unanswered. Commander Blackwood, Admiral Thorne addressed him at his promotion ceremony. Your knowledge of the Selenian sector is unparalleled. The Alliance needs officers who understand potential adversaries. Adversaries, sir? I thought they were allies. Allies, competitors, adversaries, the line shifts depending on interests, Commander. Remember that. Darius accepted command of the interstellar fleet with a single condition: autonomy in Selenian operations. The request raised eyebrows but was granted based on his exemplary record. His first official act was to demand access to sealed diplomatic records from his time with Vexila. The Selenian Council's swift refusal only confirmed his suspicions that something had been deliberately hidden. Prepare the fleet, he ordered his staff. We're conducting exercises at the Selenian border. Before leaving, Trill pressed a small device into Vex's hand. A subspace receiver. Keep it hidden. I'll send news when I can. For another year, Vex endured, listening to Trill's infrequent transmissions for any mention of Darius. She learned of growing tensions between their worlds despite the treaty, resource disputes, cultural misunderstandings. Then came the transmission that changed everything. Commander Blackwood has been appointed Fleet Admiral, Trill's voice crackled through the receiver. His first act was to demand the release of all diplomatic records from your negotiation period. The Council refused. He's bringing warships to our borders, Vex. They say he's looking for something. Or someone. Vex's hands trembled as she shut off the device. After all this time, Darius was coming back, not as the warm, curious man she'd fallen in love with, but as a commander seeking answers. Perhaps vengeance. She looked around at the sparse hut that had been her prison for 4 years. For the first time since her exile began, Vexila began to plan her escape. If Darius was returning to Selenian space, she would find a way to reach him before his misplaced rage. The Earth Alliance flagship Vindication cut through Selenian space like a blade, its sleek obsidian hull absorbing starlight rather than reflecting it. Behind it, 5 battle cruisers maintained perfect formation, a show of force not seen in this sector since before the treaty. On the command deck, Fleet Admiral Darius Blackwood studied the holographic display of Selenia Prime. For years had transformed him. The laugh lines around his eyes had deepened into permanent creases of concentration. His dark hair was now streaked with silver at the temples. But it was his eyes that had changed most, steel gray, calculating, devoid of the warmth they once held when looking at a certain emerald-skinned ambassador. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the Selenian High Council," his communications officer reported. "Counselor Zethmore requests your presence planetside for diplomatic discussions." Darius's jaw tightened at the name. Zethmore, the last person seen with Vex before she disappeared from official channels. "Inform the counselor I'll be conducting these negotiations from my ship. If he wishes to speak, he can come here." "Sir, that violates diplomatic protocol." Protocol didn't seem to concern the Selenians when they recalled their ambassador without explanation 4 years ago, Darius cut in. "Hold position at the outer marker. Maintain yellow alert status." Commander Eliza Mason approached his chair, speaking low. "Darius, is this wise? We're here for information, not confrontation." After 4 years of stonewalling, confrontation might be the only language they understand. His eyes never left the display. "Besides, we're conducting routine exercises in international space. Nothing provocative about that. 3 Selenian patrol vessels have altered course to shadow us," the tactical officer announced. "Let them watch," Darius replied coolly. "We have nothing to hide." On Selenia's frozen moon, Vexila huddled in the maintenance bay of an automated supply vessel, her breath forming crystals in the unheated cargo hold. The supply drones were programmed to ignore biosignatures once they completed their delivery run, a security flaw Trill had discovered and exploited to smuggle her aboard. Her green skin had paled to a muted jade from years without sunlight, making the ceremonial markings, though chemically dulled, stand out like bruises. She'd grown painfully thin, her metabolism slowed by the meager rations of exile. But in her amber eyes burned a determination that 4 years of solitude had failed to extinguish. The ship shuddered as it approached Selenia Prime's orbital platform. Soon, she would need to move. Trill had provided her with maintenance worker credentials and the basic layout of the spaceport, but beyond that, she was on her own. As the cargo doors hissed open, Vex pulled the hood of her worker's uniform low over her distinctive red hair and slipped past the automated scanners. Her heart raced as she blended with the busy dock workers, keeping her head down. "Human warships at the border," she overheard one worker saying. 6 of them, heavily armed. "Why now?" another asked. "The treaty has held for years. They're saying the fleet admiral has some personal vendetta. Used to be stationed here during the negotiations." Vex quickened her pace. She needed to find a way to reach Darius's ship before the situation escalated further. At a public terminal, she accessed the spaceport's outbound schedule. A supply shuttle was departing for the orbital diplomatic station in 1 hour, the same station where visiting dignitaries would dock. If Zethmore followed protocol, he would meet the humans at the neutral location. And where Zethmore went, so would his personal shuttle. "Admiral, Counselor Zethmore has agreed to meet at the orbital diplomatic station," Commander Mason reported. "He's requesting a small delegation only." Darius nodded. "Prepare my shuttle. You'll accompany me, along with Lieutenant Kojo." Sir, may I remind you that your presence on this mission was not in the operational parameters approved by command, Mason said carefully. This personal involvement is necessary for someone who speaks their language, Darius finished. Both literally and figuratively. The shuttle journey to the diplomatic station was tense. Darius reviewed the questions he'd prepared, official inquiries about trade discrepancies, resource allocation, border protocols. But beneath those, his real questions burned. What happened to Vexila? Why was she removed? What were they hiding? The Selenian delegation was already seated when they arrived at the sterile conference room. Counselor Zethmore's pale green face remained impassive as Darius entered, though his inner eyelids flickered briefly, a Selenian tell of surprise or unease. Fleet Admiral Blackwood, he greeted formally. Your presence honors us, though your fleet's proximity to our homeworld is concerning. Routine exercises, Darius replied smoothly, taking his seat. Though I'm sure you understand our need to maintain readiness, given recent developments. What developments would those be, Admiral? Inconsistencies in the implementation of our treaty. Specifically, restricted access to diplomatic archives and personnel. Darius leaned forward. Your people have denied 17 formal requests for information over the past 3 years. Zethmore's expression hardened. Some matters are internal to Selenian governance and not subject to human oversight. Like the sudden removal of your chief negotiator? Darius countered. Ambassador Vexila's abrupt recall directly preceded several reinterpretations of treaty provisions that have disadvantaged Earth. A flicker of something, recognition, perhaps anxiety, crossed the counselor's face. Ambassador Vexila was reassigned according to our protocols. Her personal conduct was found wanting. The implication hung in the air. Darius felt his pulse quicken but kept his expression neutral. I find it interesting that the one Selenian who advocated most strongly for human-Selenian cooperation was conveniently removed once the treaty was secured. Your interest in a single diplomat seems unusually personal, Admiral, Zethmore observed coldly. Were there aspects of your relationship with the ambassador that weren't included in your official reports? Before Darius could respond, alarms blared throughout the station. The conference room door slid open as a security officer burst in. Counselor, we have an intruder, a female Selenian who bypassed security. She's heading for this sector. Zethmore rose sharply. Seal the station. No one enters or leaves until. The words died in his throat as the door slid open again. Framed in the doorway stood a figure Darius had seen countless times in his dreams and nightmares over the past 4 years, thinner, paler, her vibrant hair dulled to rust, but unmistakably Vexila. Her amber eyes locked with his, a storm of emotions crossing her face, hope, fear, determination. Darius, she said, his name sounding like both a prayer and a plea on her lips. The security officers moved to seize her, but Darius was faster, placing himself between them and Vex. This woman is under Earth Alliance protection, he declared, though he had no authority to make such a claim. This woman is a convicted criminal, Zethmore snarled. An exile who has violated the terms of her sentence by returning to Selenian space. Convicted? Darius turned to Vex, confusion warring with the surge of emotions her presence evoked. What is he talking about? I was sentenced to exile, she said, her voice stronger than her frail appearance suggested. For loving you. For believing our peoples could be more than diplomatic partners. The room seemed to tilt beneath Darius's feet as understanding began to dawn. Not abandonment. Not betrayal. Punishment. Seize her, Zethmore ordered. And the humans as well. They've clearly conspired in this escape. As the guards advanced, alarms suddenly shifted from yellow to red. The station rocked violently. Station defensive systems have activated, Lieutenant Kojo reported, checking his communicator. Sir, our fleet is reporting Selenian warships decloaking near our position. In the chaos that followed, guards reaching for weapons, diplomats shouting accusations, Darius made the only decision that mattered. He grabbed Vex's arm and pulled her toward the emergency evacuation pods. "We need to get to my ship," he said urgently. "Right now." As they ran, the weight of 4 years of misunderstanding crashed over him. He had returned seeking vengeance against perceived betrayal, only to find the truth was something far more devastating, and far more precious. Behind them, the first shots of what would become known as the Selenian Crisis were fired, transforming the diplomatic station into the front line of a conflict. The evacuation pod hurtled through space, its emergency thrusters straining against the gravitational pull of Selenia Prime. Inside, Vexila and Darius sat across from each other, 4 years of absence stretching between them like an unbridgeable chasm. "Vindication, this is Admiral Blackwood," Darius spoke into the comm unit. "Lock onto my emergency beacon and prepare for immediate retrieval. We have a diplomatic situation." "Acknowledged, Admiral," came the crisp response. "Be advised, we are engaging with Selenian vessels. Extraction may be delayed." The connection crackled out as the pod entered a radiation belt. Silence fell, broken only by the soft hiss of life support systems. Vex studied Darius's face, the new lines around his mouth, the hardened set of his jaw, the silver threading through his dark hair. This man was both familiar and a stranger. "You look different," she finally said, her voice hoarse from disuse. "So do you." His eyes traced the faded ceremonial markings on her skin, the dull rust of her once vibrant hair, the sharp angles of her too thin frame. "Exile doesn't appear to have been kind. The outer reaches are not known for their hospitality." She attempted a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Though I suppose prison is not meant to be comfortable. Why didn't you tell me?" The question escaped him with an intensity that surprised them both. "Why let me believe you'd simply discarded what was between us?" Vex's amber eyes met his. "Would you have left willingly if you knew? Would you have accepted being powerless to change my sentence?" "I would have fought for you. And that would have destroyed everything we worked for," she replied softly. "The treaty was fragile. If Earth had protested my punishment, the Council would have used it as evidence of human manipulation. They would have claimed I was compromised, that the treaty was negotiated under duress. So instead you sacrificed yourself." His voice was tight with anger, not at her, but at the situation, at his own blindness. "I sacrificed us," she corrected. "There's a difference." The pod shuddered as something struck its outer hull. Warning lights flashed red. "We're being targeted," Darius said, checking the scanner. "Small Selenian interceptor." "Zethmore won't let me reach your ship," Vex said grimly. "Not with what I know." "And what exactly do you know that has the counselor so concerned?" Vex leaned forward, lowering her voice despite them being alone. "The law against interspecies relationships isn't about cultural purity, as they claim. It's about maintaining power. The Council discovered something during initial biological studies of humans: our species are genetically compatible." Darius's eyes widened. "Compatible? You mean?" "Yes. Children would be possible. Mixed children who would bridge our worlds, who would belong to neither fully but connect both. The Council fears what that would mean for their authority." "And they sentenced you to exile for this possibility?" "They sentenced me for acting on it," she said, holding his gaze meaningfully. Understanding dawned on his face. "You were 8 weeks pregnant when they discovered our relationship. The child did not survive the punishment procedures." The color drained from Darius's face. His hands, which had commanded warships and negotiated treaties, trembled as they reached for hers. "I never knew," he whispered. "You weren't meant to." Her voice cracked. "I made my peace with it. Or tried to." Before he could respond, the pod lurched violently. The interference cleared from the comm unit. "Admiral Blackwood, we have you on tractor beam," came the voice of his first officer. "Prepare for emergency extraction." Minutes later, they stumbled onto the deck of the Vindication's shuttle bay, alarms blaring throughout the ship. "Sir, we're under attack from multiple Selenian vessels," Commander Mason reported, hurrying toward them. She stopped short at the sight of Vex. "This is former Ambassador Vexila," Darius supplied. "Currently under my protection. Admiral, with all due respect, she's the key to preventing an interstellar war," he cut her off. "And currently the only Selenian who might be able to explain why their fleet is firing on an Earth Alliance vessel." On the bridge, tactical displays showed the grim reality. 3 Selenian warships had engaged the Vindication's escort vessels, while a 4th was on intercept course. "They're trying to prevent any communication with Earth Command," Vex observed. "Zethmore will claim this was a human provocation to justify larger military action." "How can you be sure?" "Because I know what they fear most, the truth becoming public. My exile wasn't officially recorded. My trial was secret. If word reaches either of our homeworlds about what really happened, the Council's authority would be undermined." Darius turned to his communications officer. "Establish a direct channel to Earth Alliance Command. Priority Alpha." "Sir, long-range communications are being jammed." "Then prepare a data packet. We'll launch it via probe on a stealth trajectory." He glanced at Vex. "I need you to record your testimony. Everything, the relationship, the pregnancy, the trial, the exile. All of it." She paled slightly but nodded. "They'll declare me a traitor." "They already have," he said softly. "The question is whether you're willing to be a revolutionary instead." As Vex was escorted to a secure communications room, Darius turned his attention back to the battle. His ships were holding their own, but the situation was deteriorating. "Sir," Mason approached, keeping her voice low. "The crew is confused. We came for information, not war. And now there's a Selenian exile on our bridge influencing your decisions." "Not influencing, Commander. Illuminating." His expression softened momentarily. "I spent 4 years believing she betrayed everything we built. I was wrong. With respect, sir, how can you be sure she's telling the truth now? Because no one would endure what she has for a lie." His eyes hardened again. "And because I recognize the tactics of those who fear losing control." The ship rocked as a direct hit breached one of the lower decks. "Hull breach on Deck 12. Containment fields holding." Darius made his decision. "Prepare all weapons. Target their propulsion systems only. I want them disabled, not destroyed." An hour later, the immediate crisis had stabilized. 2 Selenian ships had retreated with damage, 1 remained engaged but at a distance, and the data probe had successfully launched, carrying Vex's testimony toward Earth. Darius found her in his private quarters, where he'd ordered she be taken for security. She stood at the viewport, watching the distant flashes of weapons fire, her reflection ghostly against the stars. "Your testimony is away," he said, stepping into the room. "In 48 hours, both our governments will know everything." She didn't turn. "And then what? War? Revolution? Neither seems a fitting tribute to what we lost." "What we lost," he repeated, moving to stand beside her. The distance between them had narrowed but still remained. "I spent 4 years turning grief into anger, building a career on the determination to find answers. What did you build during your exile?" "Hope," she said simply. "It was the only thing they couldn't take from me." His hand moved hesitantly toward hers, their fingers almost touching on the ledge of the viewport. "I'm sorry. For not knowing. For not finding you sooner." "You came with warships, Darius," she said, finally turning to face him. "Not exactly a rescue mission." I came looking for the truth, he countered. Though I didn't expect it to hurt this much. The ship's lighting dimmed slightly as it redirected power to the shields. In the softer light, the years between them seemed to fade. Vex reached up, her slender fingers tracing the new lines on his face. We are not who we were, she said softly. That Vex and that Darius, they exist only in memory now. Then perhaps, he said, catching her hand and pressing it more firmly against his cheek, we should discover who we are now. Her eyes, those amber eyes that had haunted his dreams, filled with tears that caught the starlight. I never stopped loving you. Even when I thought you must hate me for what you believed was betrayal. I tried to hate you, he admitted. It would have been easier. The gap between them closed, for years of separation dissolving as his arms encircled her too thin frame. Their lips met, tentatively at first, then with the desperation of drowning souls finding air. Her body trembled against his, fragile yet unyielding. When they finally parted, breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. We have 48 hours before our testimony reaches Earth. Before whatever comes next. 48 hours, she repeated, her hands sliding beneath his uniform jacket, seeking the warmth of him. To remember. To heal. They came together like two halves of a shattered whole, broken edges still sharp, fitting imperfectly yet irrevocably connected. Their reunion was tender then passionate, careful then consuming, as they rediscovered each other's bodies while learning the new landscapes. Later, as she lay in his arms, her emerald skin gleaming with a vitality it had lacked for years, Vex traced the scar on his shoulder, new since their parting. What happens when the 48 hours end, she asked, the question hanging between them like the sword of Damocles. Darius's fingers tangled in her rust-colored hair. Then we face whatever comes. Together. The council will deny everything, she warned. They'll claim I'm unstable, that my testimony is false. Perhaps, he agreed. But ideas, once released, are difficult to contain. The possibility of our peoples being truly compatible, genetically, culturally, emotionally, that's more powerful than any denial. Vex propped herself up on one elbow, studying his face in the dim light. You've become quite the strategist, Admiral Blackwood. And you've become quite the revolutionary, Ambassador Vexila. Her smile held a touch of sadness. I'm not an ambassador anymore. Just an exile with a dangerous story. Stories change worlds, he said, pulling her back into his embrace. Ours is just beginning its work. As the Vindication maintained its standoff with the remaining Selenian vessel, two former lovers turned unlikely allies began to plan not just for their survival, but for a future where the truth that had condemned them might instead set both their worlds free. The diplomatic chamber aboard the Earth Alliance carrier Ascendant hummed with tension. 2 days had passed since Vex's testimony had reached Earth Command, and the response had been swift. The full Alliance fleet had been deployed to Selenian space, not as an act of war, but as a show of unified force behind their demands, a public hearing with the Selenian High Council. Darius adjusted the formal uniform he hadn't worn in years, the decorations and insignia feeling foreign after so long commanding from the bridge in standard tactical gear. Beside him, Vex stood transformed. Gone were the drab garments of exile. She wore a simple but elegant gown in deep blue, an earth color, not Selenian, its cut modified to accommodate her physiology. Her rust-colored hair had been arranged in a style that honored her heritage while acknowledging she no longer represented Selenian authority. The council has arrived, Commander Mason announced from the doorway. All 12 members, as requested. Darius looked to Vex, whose face remained carefully composed though he could see the slight tremor in her hands. Ready? No, she said honestly. But necessity rarely waits for readiness. They entered the chamber side by side, neither touching but close enough that their shoulders nearly brushed, a united front. The Selenian council members sat in a perfect semicircle, their ceremonial robes and elaborate hair ornamentation a stark contrast to the utilitarian Earth Alliance environment. At the center sat Counselor Zethmore, his pale green features arranged in diplomatic neutrality that didn't reach his eyes. Admiral Thorne, representing Earth Alliance Command, sat opposite the council with his aides. Between them, a holographic display showed representatives from both homeworlds watching the proceedings remotely, Earth's Assembly and Selenia Citizen Forum. For the first time in history, the conversation between their peoples would have no filters, no diplomatic editing. This hearing is unprecedented, Zethmore began, his voice carrying the melodic formality of Selenian high speech. And unnecessary. The Council has already explained that the exile Vexilla's claims are the fabrications of a disgraced diplomat seeking attention. Yet you agreed to this meeting, Darius observed. Why entertain fabrications? To maintain peace, Zethmore replied smoothly. A peace your military buildup threatens. Admiral Thorne cleared his throat. The Alliance fleet is here to ensure transparency, not to initiate conflict. We believe Ambassador Vexilla's testimony merits public examination. Former Ambassador, Zethmore corrected. Stripped of her title and citizenship when she violated our most sacred laws. Vex stepped forward, her amber eyes sweeping across the council members. Some avoided her gaze. Others watched with barely concealed contempt. One or two, the younger members, showed something close to curiosity. Sacred laws, she repeated. Is that what we call systematic oppression now, Counselor? Or perhaps you prefer biological control? Your exile has clearly affected your reason, Zethmore said dismissively. The Council will hear your allegations, then dismiss them with facts. Vex smiled, a gesture that contained no warmth. Facts. What an interesting concept coming from those who ordered all records of my trial expunged. She turned toward the holographic displays showing the citizens of both worlds. What neither Council nor Command has told their people is why these laws exist. Why Selenians and humans must remain separate despite our treaties, our trade, our cultural exchanges. It's not about tradition or compatibility. It's about possibility. The exile speaks treason, hissed one elderly council member. The exile speaks truth, Vex countered. Humans and Selenians are genetically compatible for reproduction. This fact was discovered during the initial scientific exchanges but classified at the highest level. Why? Because children of both worlds would belong to neither fully, and therefore could not be controlled by either. Murmurs rippled through the holographic audiences. Admiral Thorne leaned forward, his weathered face grave. These are serious claims, Counselor Zethmore. Does the Selenian Council deny them? Before Zethmore could respond, Darius activated his datapad, projecting a second hologram into the center of the room. Medical scans appeared, cellular analyses, genetic comparisons, and finally, the unmistakable image of a fetal scan. This evidence was recovered from the sealed archives of the Selenian Medical Authority, Darius stated. Recovered at great risk by members of your own scientific community who believe truth serves both our peoples better than secrets. Zethmore's inner eyelids flickered rapidly, a sign of extreme distress. These documents are forgeries. They are authenticated, came a new voice. Trill stepped forward from among the Selenian delegation, shedding his administrative robes to reveal the insignia of the reform movement that had been growing in secret on Selenia. As is the record of Ambassador Vexilla's pregnancy and its termination during her punishment procedures. Shocked silence fell over the chamber. Vex's composed facade cracked slightly, her hand instinctively seeking Darius's. He took it without hesitation, their fingers intertwining before the assembled representatives of both worlds. The child I carried was proof of what the Council feared most, Vex said, her voice steady despite the emotion beneath. Not that our species could mate, but that we could love. That the boundaries they created to maintain their authority could be transcended. One of the younger council members rose suddenly. I call for an immediate vote of no confidence in Councillor Zethmore and all who participated in these actions. The Selenian people were not consulted on these matters. Councillor Mevi, you overstep, Zethmore warned. No, Mevi replied. For too long, we have understepped. Our laws should protect our people, not control them. The holographic displays erupted with activity as citizens from both worlds began demanding answers, their representatives struggling to maintain order. Admiral Thorne exchanged glances with Darius, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. This was more than they had hoped for, not just exposure, but revolution from within. Perhaps, Darius suggested, raising his voice above the growing chaos, we should recess this hearing and allow both governments to consult with their people. After all, isn't that the foundation of true diplomacy? Not leaders deciding for their citizens, but with them? The next 12 hours passed in a whirlwind of negotiations, public forums, and private confrontations. The Selenian Council fractured, with half its members resigning rather than face questioning. On Earth, the Alliance Assembly debated the implications of genetic compatibility between their species and the ethical considerations it raised. Through it all, Darius and Vex remained together, moving between meetings and broadcasts, their personal story becoming the symbolic heart of a larger transformation. They had become living proof of what was possible between their worlds. In a rare moment of quiet, they stood together in Darius's quarters aboard the Ascendant, watching the news broadcasts from both planets. I never imagined this, Vex admitted, leaning against him. At best, I hoped for amnesty. Perhaps the freedom to contact you. Darius's arm tightened around her waist. And at worst? Execution for treason, she said simply. The Council doesn't forgive those who challenge its authority. Yet here we stand, he marveled, watching that authority crumble. A soft chime announced a visitor. The door slid open to reveal Admiral Thorne and the young Selenian Councillor Mevi. Admiral Blackwood, Ambassador Vexila, Thorne greeted them formally. The provisional governments of both worlds. Mevi stepped forward, her ceremonial robes exchanged for the simpler garments of the reform movement. The ban on interspecies relationships will be immediately suspended pending a full review. All those punished under these laws will be granted amnesty and restoration of status. Additionally, Thorne continued, both governments have requested that you serve as joint ambassadors to oversee the transition. Darius and Vex exchanged glances of surprise. Us? Vex asked. After everything? Because of everything, Mevi corrected. Your story has resonated across both worlds. You are the bridge we need now. After their visitors departed, Darius pulled Vex into his arms, studying her face in the starlight that streamed through the viewport. For years of exile had left their mark on her emerald features, just as his years of anger had carved new lines into his. Yet in each other's eyes, they saw not just who they had been or who they were now, but who they might become together. Joint ambassadors, he said with a small smile. Not how I imagined our reunion ending. Not an ending, Vex corrected, her fingers tracing the silver at his temples. A beginning. For us, and perhaps for many more like us in the future. There will be resistance, he cautioned. Change never comes easily, especially to those who've benefited from the old ways. Then we face it together, she said firmly. As we should have 4 years ago. He took her face in his hands, his thumbs gently caressing the ceremonial markings that told her lineage, markings that would, if they succeeded, someday be joined with human features in children of two worlds. Together, he agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss. 3 months later, on the newly established Harmony station that orbited precisely between Earth and Selenian space, Ambassadors Darius Blackwood and Vexila stood side by side to welcome the first group of mixed-species couples who had come forward since the laws changed. Some were new relationships, sparked in the wake of the reforms. Others had been hidden for years, existing in shadows and secrets much like their own had been. As they moved among them, listening to stories both painful and hopeful, Vex felt Darius's hand slip into hers. She glanced up to find him watching her with an expression that still made her inner hearts flutter, even after all they had endured. "Regrets?" he asked quietly. Vex thought of the child they had lost, the years stolen from them, the hardships of exile. Then she looked around at the faces of those they had helped free from similar fates. "No," she said, squeezing his hand. "Not anymore." The starlight streamed through Harmony Station's enormous viewports, illuminating the gathered couples, green skin alongside human tones, Selenian ceremonial markings beside Earth tattoos, differences that complemented rather than divided. In their faces, Vex and Darius saw the future they had sacrificed so much to create, a future where love was no longer condemned,